I felt my heart hammering against my chest as the church doors opened. The whispers started immediately, cutting through the sacred silence like knives, but what they didn't know was that the man waiting for me at that altar had already chosen me over their entire world. Let me tell you how I went from being the girl they tried to destroy to becoming the woman who changed everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Sarah, and at 24 I had learned that sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with the ugliest betrayals. Growing up in a small farming town outside Portland, I never imagined I'd find myself standing at the threshold of the most exclusive cathedral in the city, wearing a dress that cost more than my father made in 3 years. But life has a way of writing stories we never see coming. It all started 18 months ago when I was working double shifts at Miller's Diner, trying to save enough money to finish my teaching degree. The diner sat on the edge of town, catching travelers and truckers who needed a hot meal and strong coffee. Most days blended together in a haze of coffee refills and tired smiles, until the morning when everything changed. He walked in during the breakfast rush, tall and confident in a way that made the entire diner seem smaller. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his suit probably worth more than my car, but what caught my attention wasn't his obvious wealth. It was the way he looked lost, like someone who had everything, but couldn't find what he was searching for. When he sat in my section, I noticed his hands shaking slightly as he reached for the coffee cup. "Rough morning?" I asked, refilling his cup without being asked. Most wealthy customers who wandered into our diner wanted quick service and no conversation. But something about him seemed different, vulnerable in a way that money couldn't hide. He looked up at me then, and I saw something in his green eyes that I recognized. Loneliness. The kind that comes from being surrounded by people who only see your bank account. "You could say that," he replied, his voice carrying a weight that spoke of responsibilities I couldn't imagine. "I'm supposed to be getting married in 6 months to someone I've known since childhood. Someone my family chose. Someone who's perfect on paper." He paused, studying my face as if trying to decide whether to trust me with his truth. But I've never felt more alone in my life. I set the coffee pot down and really looked at him. "Being alone and being lonely aren't the same thing," I said softly. "Sometimes you can be surrounded by 100 people and still feel invisible. But when you find the right person, even a room full of strangers feels like home." I had no idea why I was sharing such personal thoughts with a customer, but something about his sadness called to mind. That was the beginning of everything. Marcus, as I learned his name was, began stopping by the diner every morning on his way to work. At first, our conversations were brief, surface-level exchanges about the weather or the quality of the coffee. But gradually, something deeper began to emerge. He told me about his family's expectations, the pressure of running a business empire he'd inherited at 28, the weight of decisions that affected thousands of employees. I shared my own dreams of becoming a teacher, my plans to work with underprivileged children, my belief that education could break cycles of poverty. We talked about books we loved, places we wanted to travel, the kind of people we hoped to become. Neither of us mentioned his engagement, but it hung between us like a storm cloud, growing darker and more unavoidable with each passing day. 3 months into our morning conversations, Marcus asked if I'd like to have dinner somewhere other than the diner. "There's this little place by the river," he said, his fingers nervously drumming against the counter. "Nothing fancy, just good food and a chance to talk without the sound of sizzling bacon." I knew I should say no. I knew he belonged to someone else, someone from his world who could give him the life he was born into. But my heart had already made the decision before my mind could intervene. That dinner changed everything between us. Away from the diner's fluorescent lights and constant bustle, I saw Marcus, not as the wealthy businessman who drove expensive cars, but as the man who worried about his elderly housekeeper's arthritis, who anonymously funded scholarships for students who couldn't afford college, who stayed awake at night wondering if he was making decisions that would honor his late father's legacy. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, let me tell you how our relationship deepened into something neither of us expected. We began meeting regularly, always in quiet places away from his usual social circles. Coffee shops in neighborhoods where no one knew his name, walks through parks where we could talk freely, small restaurants where the food was simple but the conversations were anything but. Marcus told me about the woman he was supposed to marry, Victoria Pemberton, daughter of his family's oldest business partners. "She's everything my mother dreamed of for me," he said one evening as we watched the sunset from a hill overlooking the city. "Beautiful, educated, from the right family. She knows how to navigate our world, how to host charity galas, how to smile for photographers. On paper, she's perfect." "But?" I prompted, sensing there was more to the story. He was quiet for a long moment, his hand finding mine in the gathering darkness. "But when I'm with her, I feel like I'm playing a role in someone else's life. When I'm with you, I feel like myself for the first time in years. You see me, Sarah. Not my bank account, not my family name, not what I can provide. You see who I actually am." That night, everything changed between us. We stopped pretending our feelings were just friendship. Stopped denying the electricity that sparked every time our hands touched. Stopped fighting the love that had been growing stronger with each stolen moment. But we also knew that loving each other meant facing an impossible choice. Marcus would have to choose between the life that had been planned for him and the life he wanted with me. The decision came sooner than either of us expected. Marcus's mother announced that the engagement party was being moved up, scheduled for the following month. The pressure from both families was mounting. Business mergers were being finalized that depended on the marriage alliance, and the weight of expectation was crushing him. "I can't do it," he told me one night, his voice breaking. "I can't marry her when I'm in love with you." "But what about your family? Your business?" I asked, even though my heart was soaring at his words. "You'd be giving up everything you've worked for, everything your father built." He cupped my face in his hands, his eyes intense in the moonlight. "Sarah, I've spent my entire life building something to leave behind. But what's the point of having everything if you can't share it with the person you love? What's success if you're empty inside?" 2 weeks later, Marcus broke his engagement to Victoria. The news exploded through high society like a bomb, sending shockwaves through families who had planned this alliance for decades. The Pembertons were furious, threatening legal action and the dissolution of business partnerships that went back generations. Marcus's own mother refused to speak to him, convinced that he was throwing away his future for what she called, quote, "a phase." But Marcus held firm. He sold his stake in several companies to buy out partners who wanted to sever ties, restructured his business empire to stand independently, and weathered the social ostracism that came with defying his family's expectations. Through it all, he kept coming to the diner every morning, sitting in my section, reminding me that his choice to love me was the best decision he'd ever made. The proposal came 6 months later, not in some grand gesture orchestrated by event planners, but during one of our quiet walks through the park, where we'd shared so many conversations. He got down on one knee beside the pond where we'd fed ducks and talked about our dreams, pulling out a ring that wasn't the biggest or most expensive, but was chosen specifically because it reminded him of my eyes. "Sarah," he said, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes, "you've shown me what it means to be truly wealthy, not in money or property or status, but in love, in purpose, in knowing that someone sees the real you and chooses to stay. Will you marry me? Will you help me build a life that's ours, not theirs?" I said yes through tears of my own, knowing that we were choosing love over ease, authenticity over approval, our own path over the one that had been carved out for us. But neither of us could have predicted the war that Victoria and her allies would wage to prevent our wedding from ever taking place. The engagement announcement in the local paper was modest, just a few lines about a local teacher marrying a businessman. But word spread quickly through Marcus's former social circle, and the reaction was swift and vicious. Victoria, who had initially maintained dignified silence about the broken engagement, now emerged as the leader of a campaign to destroy what she saw as a threat to everything she represented. She gathered around her a group of women who had been her bridesmaids-in-waiting, society daughters who viewed my relationship with Marcus as a dangerous precedent. If someone like me could steal away one of their most eligible bachelors, what did that mean for the carefully constructed world they'd been born into? I represented everything they feared. The possibility that love might matter more than lineage, that character might outweigh bank accounts, that their privileged positions weren't as secure as they'd believed. The campaign against me started subtly. Whispers at social events about the gold digger who had seduced Marcus away from his proper match. Anonymous letters to my employer questioning my character and suggesting that perhaps I wasn't suitable to teach children. Social media posts that managed to be both vicious and plausibly deniable, questioning what kind of woman would break up an engagement and steal another woman's fiancé. But Victoria and her followers underestimated both my resilience and Marcus's determination to protect what we had built together. Every attack only strengthened our resolve. Every attempt to shame us only clarified how right we were for each other. Marcus used his remaining business connections to ensure I faced no professional consequences, while I drew on the inner strength I'd developed growing up in a family that had always faced challenges together. The final battle would come on our wedding day itself in front of God and witnesses, when Victoria and her bridesmaids would make their last desperate attempt to prevent our union, but they had no idea that by then, we had already won the only war that mattered, the fight to choose love over fear, authenticity over appearance, our own truth over their expectations. As I stood in the bridal suite that morning, putting on the dress Marcus had chosen with me, I knew that whatever happened when those church doors opened, we had already achieved something more valuable than their approval. We had found each other across the divide of different worlds, and we had chosen to build something new together. The real story was just beginning, and it would be written not by the society pages or family expectations, but by two people who believed that love was worth fighting for, no matter what forces tried to tear it apart. The morning of our wedding dawned gray and threatening, as if the sky itself was reflecting the storm that was about to break. I stood at the window of the bridal suite, watching expensive cars pull into the cathedral parking lot, knowing that many of those guests were coming not to celebrate our love, but to witness what they hoped would be its destruction. But something had shifted inside me during the months of attacks and whispers. I was no longer the uncertain diner waitress who had fallen in love with a customer. I had become a woman who knew exactly what she was worth. My wedding dress hung behind me like a symbol of everything I had fought to claim. It wasn't the most expensive gown in the world, but Marcus and I had chosen it together during a quiet afternoon when the bridal salon was nearly empty. The shop owner, an elderly Italian woman named Rosa, had tears in her eyes as she fitted the dress. "In 40 years of making wedding gowns," she told me, "I have never seen a bride who glows the way you do when you speak of your love. That is the real beauty, not the dress." My sister Emma was helping me with the final touches, her hands gentle as she arranged my veil. She had flown in from Chicago, where she worked as a nurse, bringing with her the kind of unconditional support that only family can provide. "You know," she said softly, "when we were kids and you used to talk about your dream wedding, you never once mentioned the dress or the flowers or the venue. You always talked about finding someone who would choose you every single day, someone who would see the real you and love what they found." "I remember," I whispered, thinking about all those childhood conversations when we had shared a bedroom and whispered our dreams into the darkness. "I used to think that kind of love was just in fairy tales." Emma smiled, adjusting the small pearl earrings that had belonged to our grandmother. "Maybe it is a fairy tale, but that doesn't make it less real. Sometimes, the best love stories are the ones that seem impossible until they happen." The knock on the door interrupted our quiet moment. My father entered, looking handsome in his borrowed suit, his weathered hands gentle as he took mine. David Chen had worked construction his entire life, building other people's dreams with his own hands, and seeing him in this elegant cathedral felt like watching two worlds collide. "Ready, sweetheart?" he asked, but I could see the concern in his eyes. "Dad, what if they're right? What if I don't belong in his world?" The question had been haunting me for weeks, growing stronger with each vicious comment on social media, each whispered conversation that stopped when I entered a room. My father's expression grew serious, and he pulled me close. "Sarah, let me tell you something I learned when I was building the foundation for the Peterson house last year. They wanted to use cheap materials, cut corners, save money. But I told them that if you don't build on solid ground with quality materials, nothing you put on top will last." He paused, making sure I understood his meaning. "Your love with Marcus, that's built on solid ground. It's built on seeing each other truly, supporting each other's dreams, choosing each other every day. All that fancy society stuff, that's just decoration. It's pretty, but it doesn't hold up the house. What you and Marcus have, that's the foundation that will last forever." His words wrapped around my heart like armor, strengthening me for what was about to come. Besides, he added with a grin that reminded me of childhood moments when he had chased away my fears, "Any woman who can handle the breakfast rush at Miller's Diner can handle a few spoiled rich girls who never worked a day in their lives." Meanwhile, I could hear the cathedral filling with guests, their voices creating a low hum that seemed to vibrate through the walls. Marcus had invited only a small number of people, mostly business associates who had remained loyal, and a few family members who had eventually accepted our relationship. But Victoria had used her influence to ensure that many of her supporters would be present, ostensibly as Marcus's family friends, but really as her army. Through the small window, I could see her arriving with her entourage. Victoria Pemberton stepped out of a silver Bentley, wearing a dress that was clearly designed to upstage the bride. A stunning navy creation that probably cost more than most people's cars. Behind her came her carefully chosen bridesmaids, women whose names regularly appeared in society pages, each one beautiful, polished, and absolutely convinced of their superiority. They moved through the cathedral entrance like a military formation, their confidence radiating the kind of power that comes from never being told no, never facing consequences, never having to fight for anything they wanted. These were women who had been born into privilege and raised to believe that their comfort mattered more than other people's dreams. But what they didn't understand was that while they had been living in their protected bubble, I had been developing the kind of strength that only comes from real challenges. Working double shifts to pay for school, caring for my mother during her illness, building my own dreams from nothing, these experiences had forged something in me that no amount of inherited wealth could buy. As the ceremony time approached, I could feel the tension building like electricity before a storm. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Whatever happens in there, remember that you are the strongest, most beautiful woman I know. I love you, and in 10 minutes, you'll be my wife." Reading his words, I felt my doubts dissolve like mist in sunlight. The wedding coordinator, a nervous woman named Mrs. Phillips, appeared at my door looking frazzled. "Miss Chen, I need to inform you that there's been some unusual activity in the cathedral. Several guests have been asking questions about the ceremony proceedings, and there seems to be some kind of organized group near the front. I wanted to make sure you were prepared for any potential disruptions." Emma's eyes flashed with anger. "What kind of disruptions? This is a sacred ceremony, not a battlefield." But I placed a calming hand on her arm. "It's okay," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "I've been expecting this. Victoria and her friends think they can intimidate me into running away, into proving that I don't deserve Marcus's love. But they're about to learn something important about what real strength looks like." I walked to the mirror for one final look at myself. The woman staring back was transformed, not by expensive makeup or designer clothing, but by the quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you're worth. My dress was simple but elegant, my jewelry minimal but meaningful, my smile genuine because it came from a heart that was completely sure of its choice. "Ladies," I said to Emma and Mrs. Phillips, "it's time to show them what happens when love meets courage." We made our way toward the cathedral entrance, where my father was waiting with the kind of proud expression that made all the struggles of the past months worthwhile. The cathedral doors opened, and the sight that greeted me was both magnificent and intimidating. Hundreds of guests filled the ornate pews, their faces turning toward me with expressions that ranged from curious to hostile. The afternoon sun streamed through stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across the stone floor, as if the universe itself was blessing our union. At the altar, Marcus stood waiting in his charcoal gray suit, his eyes locked on mine with such intensity that everything else seemed to fade away. Beside him stood his best man, his cousin David, who had supported our relationship from the beginning. But it was Marcus's expression that gave me strength, his face radiating the kind of joy that comes from knowing you're about to marry your best friend. As my father and I began our walk down the aisle, I could feel the weight of every gaze, could hear the whispers that followed our progress, like a gathering storm. But I kept my eyes focused on Marcus, drawing strength from the love I saw there, the absolute certainty that whatever storm was about to break, we would weather it together. Halfway down the aisle, I saw them. Victoria and her bridesmaids had positioned themselves strategically in the front rows, their faces carefully composed but their eyes burning with determination. They looked like a council of war, beautiful and deadly, ready to execute whatever plan they had devised to destroy this moment. As we approached the front of the cathedral, I noticed something that made my heart skip. Several of Victoria's friends were holding their phones, clearly recording everything. Whatever they were planning, they wanted it documented, wanted proof of their victory over the woman who had dared to challenge their world order. But then something unexpected happened. As my father placed my hand in Marcus's, as I looked into the eyes of the man I loved more than life itself, I felt a surge of power that had nothing to do with money or status or social position. This was the power of absolute truth, of knowing beyond any doubt that this love was real, that it was worth fighting for, that it was strong enough to survive whatever attack was coming. Marcus squeezed my hand gently, his touch conveying everything he couldn't say in this sacred moment. His eyes told me that he was proud of my courage, that he admired my strength, that he would stand beside me no matter what forces tried to tear us apart. In that moment, I understood something profound. We had already won the only battle that mattered. The minister, a kind elderly man who had known Marcus's family for decades, began the ceremony with words about love conquering all obstacles, about two people choosing to build something beautiful together. His voice carried clearly through the cathedral, but I could sense the restlessness in certain sections of the congregation, the anticipation of whatever disruption was being planned. As we reached the moment for exchanging vows, Marcus took both my hands in his, and spoke words that had been written not by wedding planners or family traditions, but from the depths of his heart. "Sarah," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the cathedral, "you taught me that real wealth isn't measured in dollars or properties or social connections. It's measured in moments of authentic connection, in shared dreams, in the courage to choose love over convenience. You showed me that the most valuable inheritance isn't money passed down through generations, but the strength to build something new. Something that reflects who we truly are, rather than who others expect us to be. I promise to love you not just in the easy moments, but especially when the world tries to tell us that our love isn't worthy, isn't proper, isn't enough." His words rang through the cathedral like a challenge, and I could see Victoria's group exchanging meaningful glances. But I was no longer afraid of whatever they were planning. Standing there in that sacred space, surrounded by the weight of centuries of promises made and kept, I felt the absolute certainty that our love could survive anything. When it was my turn to speak, I looked directly into Marcus's eyes and shared the truth that had been growing in my heart through months of attacks and obstacles. "Marcus, you didn't just choose me over the life that was planned for you. You chose the possibility that love could be stronger than expectation, that authenticity could be more valuable than approval, that two people who truly see each other could build something more beautiful than anything inherited or arranged. I promise to stand beside you as we create our own definition of success, one that values kindness over status, genuine connection over social climbing, and the courage to follow our hearts over the safety of following rules we never agreed to. I promise to love you not just when it's easy, but especially when it requires us to be brave." As I spoke these words, something shifted in the cathedral. The energy that had been building toward confrontation began to transform into something else. Even some of Victoria's supporters seemed moved by the genuine emotion in our vows, the undeniable authenticity of what they were witnessing. But Victoria herself was not deterred. As the minister asked if anyone had objections to our union, she rose from her seat with the fluid grace of someone who had been preparing for this moment for months. Her bridesmaids rose with her, creating a wall of silk and determination that commanded the attention of every person in the cathedral. "I object." Victoria's voice rang out clear and strong, carrying the confidence of someone who had never been denied anything she wanted. The cathedral fell into shocked silence as all eyes turned toward her, and I felt Marcus's hand tighten protectively around mine. But instead of fear, I felt something else rising in my chest. This was the moment I had been unconsciously preparing for my entire life. The moment when I would have to choose between shrinking away from conflict or standing up for what I knew was right. And as I looked at Victoria's perfectly composed face, at her army of supporters, at the phones recording every second of this confrontation, I realized that I was no longer the uncertain young woman who had served coffee and wondered if she was worthy of love. I was a woman who had been tested by months of attacks and had emerged stronger, who had learned that real power comes not from trying to tear others down, but from building something beautiful that can withstand any storm. The final battle was about to begin, but I was ready. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.